Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really fundamental question for the energy transition. How do we get carbon neutral liquid fuels, the kind we can trade globally at scale? We're diving into power to liquids, or PTO. It's complex, definitely challenging sometimes, and our source material for this is a really interesting foundational techno-economic assessment. It's a bit older now, but crucial. We're using the full title because, honestly, the scope is just massive. It's the Techno-Economic Assessment of Power to Liquids, PTL, Fuels Production, and Global Trading based on hybrid PV wind power plants.
Yeah, this study is fascinating because it's essentially a detailed forecast. You really have to keep the timing in mind here. The paper came out back in 2016, but what the researchers were doing was projecting forward. They were trying to map out the cost structures and the technology for the year 2030. Their main goal was to figure out, okay, is renewable synthetic diesel, RE diesel, actually viable if you build it on these big hybrid power plants?
Okay, right. So let's unpack that core idea first. Because, you, our listener, you hear constantly about electrification. Electric cars, heat pumps, everything's going electric. So if that's the future, why were these experts back in 2016 already planning for synthetic liquid fuels? Why do we even need PTL?
Well, it really boils down to physics and logistics, honestly. Even with all the battery advancements we're seeing, there are these hard-to-abate sectors. Think global aviation, think massive container ships, heavy-duty trucks. These just can't realistically be electrified anytime soon. They need incredibly dense energy storage and really fast refueling.
Something batteries just don't offer at that scale yet.
Exactly. So PDL acts like a bridge. It's the process where you take renewable electricity, RE plus water, and critically captured CO2,
Oh.
and you synthesize liquid fuels, fuels that are, chemically speaking, pretty much identical to diesel or jet fuel today.
Yeah.
But they're carbon neutral because the CO2, it came from the air, or maybe sustainable biomass, not from fossil reserves underground.
Okay. And the study mentions that back when it was written, gas to liquids, GTL, that was already commercial. But PTL, this power-based route, it was still kind of moving from the lab towards commercial reality.
Yeah, precisely. The basic science was there, absolutely. But the economics of scaling it up to an industrial level, that was the big question they were trying to model.
Right. So let's get into the actual mechanics here. Because the value chain they describe, it's pretty involved, but how it all fits together is like essential for the cost side. It kicks off with these enormous hybrid PV wind power plants.
Huge scale.
That electricity then powers electrolysis units. That's
Yeah.
for making hydrogen, H2.
Yep.
Then that H2 gets combined with CO2. And importantly, they specified getting that CO2 from scrubbing ambient air, not from a point source.
Right, a sustainable source.
Then those two, the H2 and CO2, flow into what's called a reverse water gas shift unit, RWGS.
And that RWGS step is really crucial. It's where you convert the CO2 and hydrogen into synthesis gas, or syngas, basically a mix of hydrogen and carbon monoxide.
Yeah.
And once you've got that syngas, then you feed it into the famous Fischer-Tropsch synthesis process, FT synthesis.
Right.
That's kind of where the magic happens, chemically speaking. The syngas molecules are used like building blocks. They get stitched together to form long hydrocarbon chains. And those chains are then upgraded, refined into the final product, in this case, RE diesel. The whole sequence is often just called H2TL, hydrogen to liquids.
Okay, H2TL. Got it.
Now, what's really telling about this specific study design is the choice they made for the electrolysis part, for making the hydrogen. Today we talk a lot about PM electrolyzers or even solid oxide, SOEC, which might be more efficient or integrate better, say, with high temperatures. But this study, projecting for 2030 back in 2016, they chose the alkaline electrolysis cell, AEC.
Okay, why AEC? Was it better?
Not necessarily technically superior in all aspects. But back then, AEC was the most mature technology, especially at very large scales. It had the highest capacity units available. And crucially, it had the lowest projected capital expenditure, the CapEx, for the kind of massive 5-gigawatt facility they were modeling.
Ah, so it was about cost certainty and scale.
Exactly. They prioritized the known quantity, the less risky financial bet for that 2030 timeframe.
And there's this other bit of kind of financial genius baked into the design loop that's easy to miss. Capturing CO2 from thin air. That takes a lot of energy, right? Especially heat.
Oh, absolutely. It's very energy intensive.
But they found a way to subsidize that cost internally.
Yes. The study designed it so the heat needed for the CO2 air capture unit and also for the RWGS unit,
Right.
it's supplied by waste heat.
Waste heat from where?
From the electrolysis units, which get quite hot, and also from the Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, which is an exothermic process that releases heat. By capturing and reusing that internal heat, they avoid having to buy external heat, like burning natural gas or using more electricity.
So it's not just about efficiency, it's a critical cost-saving integration. It helps make the whole value chain hang together financially.
Precisely. It lets them use that sustainable, go-anywhere ambient air capture for CO2 without it completely wrecking the final fuel cost.
Okay, now geography. This is where, for me, the study gets really interesting and potentially disruptive to how we think about energy trade. They didn't put their imaginary 5GW plant near, say, Rotterdam or some big European industrial hub. They put it in Patagonia, Argentina. Why down there?
Yeah, that's key. It's because of what you might call the holy grail for renewables, complementary resources. Patagonia was identified in their analysis as one of the absolute best spots on the planet where solar PV resources and wind resources work together almost perfectly.
So when the sun isn't shining as much, the wind is likely blowing and vice versa.
Exactly. This minimizes downtime and maximizes the energy production across the entire year. It leads to extremely high full load hours FLH for the combined power plant. Basically, it's running close to its maximum potential, far more often than a plant relying on just sun or just wind.
And the scale they modeled is just huge.
It's staggering. A 5GW hybrid plant producing around 34,700 gigawatt hours of electricity a year.
Wow.
And with this setup, the hybrid power, the integrated heat recovery, the overall efficiency of the PTL process, converting that input electricity into final liquid fuel energy, they calculated it at 57.5%.
Which is pretty respectable, isn't it?
Very much so, especially for the technology assumptions back then.
Okay, so let's talk money. Because great efficiency doesn't matter if the fuel ends up costing, 10 times more than regular diesel.
Right, so they set a baseline for comparison. They used projections for 2030 based on crude oil at $80 per barrel. Add in refining costs, and conventional diesel came out to about $95 USD per barrel in their estimate. That's the target to beat.
$95 a barrel. Correct.
Now, for their RE diesel base case, this assumes a sort of standard commercial investment, a weighted average cost of capital, or WACC, of 7%. And importantly, no special policy support like carbon taxes, and no extra income from selling byproducts.
The straightforward business case.
Yes. And the projected cost was significantly higher, $160.85 USD per barrel.
Oof. Okay, $160 versus $95? That's nearly a 70% premium. That sounds like a tough sell.
It does on the surface.
If you break down that $160 cost, where's the money actually going? What are the big cost drivers?
The study has a great chart showing this. The biggest chunk, well, 53%, 52.8% to be exact, is the H2TL plant itself. That's all the chemical processing. The CO2 capture, the RWGS, the Fischer-Tropsch reactors, the final fuel upgrading.
Okay, the chemistry costs the most. What's next?
The electricity generation. Even in Patagonia, the best spot globally, building and running that massive hybrid PV wind plant accounts for about 32.3% of the full cost.
Still a huge chunk.
Absolutely. But here's the bit that really rewrites the rulebook on energy logistics. Shipping.
Right, getting it from Patagonia all the way to, say, Rotterdam in Europe. That must cost a fortune.
You'd think so, but no. In their analysis, shipping accounted for a negligible 1.3% of the total cost per barrel.
Wow, only 1.3%.
Yeah, it's almost lost in the noise. And this really hammers home one of the study's core messages for these PTL fuels, where you make the electricity is way more important than how close you are to the final customer.
So the cost of cheap, consistent, renewable power outweighs the shipping cost, even halfway around the world.
Overwhelmingly so.
Yeah.
You can afford the shipping if your input energy is cheap and reliable enough. Forget pipelines. It's all about finding the best RE resource locations.
Okay, so that brings us back to the cost gap, that big $65 difference between the $160 RE diesel and the $95 conventional stuff. How do we close that gap? What did the study identify as the game changers?
They pinpointed three main factors that could make RE diesel competitive.
Yeah.
The first one is all about finance, managing the investment risk, specifically the cost of capital, the WACC.
Okay.
Building something this huge is expensive, and investors need a return based on the perceived risk. The base case assumed a 7% WACC. But if you could lower that risk, maybe through government loan guarantees, strategic partnerships, that kind of thing, and get the WACC down to 5%.
A de-risking strategy, they called it.
Exactly. Just that drop from 7% to 5%. WACC cuts the RE diesel cost by 14.5%. It brings it down to about $137.05 per barrel.
Okay, that's a decent chunk just from making the investment safer. What's lever number 2?
Policy. Specifically, putting a price on carbon emissions. If you apply a meaningful carbon price, they modeled 50 euros per ton of CO2 to the existing fossil fuel infrastructure.
So taxing the conventional diesel based on its emissions.
Right. That immediately adds about $30.57 per barrel to the cost of conventional diesel. It doesn't make RE diesel cheaper, but it raises the price of the competitor, closing the gap significantly.
Makes the playing field more level. And the third factor.
Resource efficiency. Using everything you produce. Remember, the electrolysis makes hydrogen, but it also makes a lot of oxygen as a byproduct.
Ah, right. H2O splits into H2 and O2.
Exactly. If you can capture that oxygen and find a market for it, they assumed a fairly conservative sales price of 20 euros per ton that generates extra revenue. And that revenue reduces the effective cost of the RE diesel by another roughly 8%, 7.95%.
Okay, so let's put it all together. You de-risk the investment to get 5% WACC. You implement a 50-ton carbon price on fossil fuels, and you sell the byproduct oxygen for 20-ton. What happens then?
That's the magic combination. When all three of those factors align, the analysis showed the RE diesel cost drops dramatically,
Down from the initial $160.
all the way down to $79 per barrel.
$79. And conventional was projected at $95, assuming $80 crude.
Bingo. Suddenly, RE diesel isn't just close, it's actually cheaper than the fossil fuel baseline under those conditions.
So the takeaway isn't that the tech was inherently too expensive, it's that it becomes competitive with the right financial framework and policy support.
That's the core economic finding. It's policy-enabled, not fundamentally uneconomic.
Which leads perfectly into the global potential discussion, right? Because they didn't just look at Patagonia, they started modeling this hourly globally.
Yes, they shifted from looking at annual averages to really detailed hourly modeling, and this highlighted something critical: minimizing excess electricity.
Meaning power that the solar panels or wind turbines generate, but the PTL plant can't use immediately.
Exactly. If your plant can only process, say, 100 units of electricity per hour, but your wind farm is suddenly generating 130 units, that extra 30 units is wasted or curtailed. You've paid to build the capacity, but you can't use the output.
And Patagonia was good for this.
Patagonia was ideal. Because the sun and wind were so complementary hour by hour, their model showed less than 3% excess electricity generation. Almost everything produced could be fed into the electrolyzers.
But other places weren't so good.
Right. They contrasted it with, for example, West Tibet, also a very high potential for sun and wind, overall high average FLH. But the patterns weren't as complementary on an hourly basis. Their model showed West Tibet could suffer up to 30% excess electricity.
And that 30% waste must kill the economics.
It absolutely does. Remember, the electricity cost is about a third of the final fuel cost. If you're effectively throwing away 30% of the electricity you generate because you overbuilt the renewables compared to what the PTL plant can consistently consume.
Your effective electricity costs skyrocket.
Precisely. It makes the final RE diesel much more expensive, potentially uneconomic, even if the location looks great on an annual average basis.
So the real key for picking global sites isn't just total sunshine or windiness, it's how well they match up hourly to feed the PTL plant consistently.
That's the critical insight for global deployment. You need that smooth, high-capacity factor input to the chemical plant.
And the potential scale here is just huge.
Enormous. The study suggested the global potential for these optimized hybrid PV wind systems could be over 10,000 GW, and the optimal PTL plant capacity globally to match that energy, around 1,962 W. We're talking terawatts.
So wrapping up the technical findings, the study really confirms the three big levers controlling the final cost, the levelized cost of fuel, or LCOF for RE diesel are.
1. Maximizing those full load hours of the hybrid power plant through smart site selection and resource complementarity.
2. Ongoing efficiency gains in the core technologies, the electrolysis and the H2TL chemical synthesis.
And 3. The financial environment, specifically the WACC for the whole massive investment.
Okay, so what does this all really mean for you listening today? This paper was from 2016, looking towards 2030, but renewable costs, solar and wind, they've fallen even faster than many predicted back then.
Which makes a case potentially even stronger now. It underlines that RE diesel technology is viable, perhaps increasingly so, but critically, it needs that policy and financial enabling environment. The finding holds. Substituting fossil fuels with these massive renewable PTL plants isn't a niche idea. It represents a genuine terawatt-scale global market opportunity. The potential is there, but the investment needs to be de-risked.
And maybe here's a final thought for you to chew on. This study suggests that if RE diesel does reach that competitive point, around $80 per barrel, or potentially lower now, it wouldn't just compete with crude oil, it could effectively set an upper limit on long-term global oil prices. If clean fuel is available at $6, why would anyone pay much more than $6 for dirty fuel long term?
A price cap set by renewables.
Exactly. So if that's even partially true, what kind of race for accelerated R&D and maybe more importantly, strategic investment in these prime remote locations like Patagonia should we really expect to see unfolding in the next few years? Something to think about. That was our deep dive into the techno-economic assessment of power to liquids, PTL, fuels production, and global trading based on hybrid PV wind power plants.